Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Brett Davis podcast. I'm Brett Davis, along today with Sarah, the producer, who's behind the scenes and doing all the puppeteering and everything. Sarah, thanks for everything you do.
Thank you.
Uh, Before we start, I'd like to say thank you to my sponsors, of course, King Amanpour for what he does, Saquon, Indian Motorcycle, IB Fitness and Marina Teal, and last but not least, Nikki Rottens. Good place for a dirty martini and anything else that you can imagine. They have even have veggie burgers. So thank you for all my sponsors and for what you do. Thank you for your support. So I'm very lucky today and very blessed to, of course, have Caitlyn Rother, who is a New York Times bestselling author of, I'm sure, of a lot of books besides the one we're going to talk about today, which is Death on Ocean Boulevard, inside the Coronado mansion case. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is a very fascinating story. I'm sure you know that because you wrote a book on it. I don't think you would just write a book that's something you didn't find interesting and fascinating. So, what was it about the case that drew you to putting together this book?
Well, the same thing that everybody else was drawn in by. It's not often. In fact, it's extremely rare. In fact, I can't even find another case like it, where you have a young woman, who is found hanging naked outside, bound behind her back, with her hands behind her back and her feet tied together and a gag in her mouth. That's the basic thing, but going deeper, the sheriff's department ruled it a suicide. Her family is convinced she was murdered, and it's been a case in the public eye for many years. But I also have a personal kind of connection to this case. My husband died by hanging in 1999,
Very sorry
and
for your loss.
thank you very much. So I had a personal interest in this case haunted me because I really wanted to know what happened. And there's been a lot of debate, a lot of speculation, a lot of misinformation. So I really wanted to try to come at this case, no agenda, no previous narrative in mind, completely open and be objective as a journalist and just try to find out what happened because the sheriff's department refused to reopen this case even after a civil jury found Adam Shacknai responsible for Rebecca's death. And Adam Shacknai is the brother of Rebecca's then boyfriend, Jonah Shacknai, who owned the house where she was found.
So, why do you think the sheriff's department didn't reopen the case?
Well, they believe strongly that it was a suicide, and they say, based on science, there were no fingerprints or no DNA found that tied Adam Shacknai to the scene, meaning the bed where her hanging rope was anchored, the rope, the T-shirt, various other items in the room. Adam Shacknai was excluded. So when they did the testing, they couldn't find his DNA or fingerprints anywhere. They only found Rebecca's fingerprints and DNA. They did find some other partial profiles that they were not able to identify because there was insufficient amount of DNA. The ZAHAU family believes that she was murdered and that the scene was wiped. So that's why, or that the killer wore gloves. So the other thing about this that's interesting is that Adam's DNA was not even found on the knife that he has admitted to using to cut her down. So that raises questions about, did they find all of the DNA or not?
Well, I mean, you've done your research and you've been investigating stories for how long?
Well, I was an investigative reporter for newspapers for 19 years before I quit to write books full time. I quit in 2006. I worked at the Union Tribune for 13 years and the LA Times, the LA Daily News. So I have a long history of being an investigative reporter and an investigator myself. And I've forgotten your question.
You were on a roll.
I know.
What I had asked is, give us a little history on your investigating in the past.
Okay, that was it.
And so
Yeah.
you probably have a checklist of things you probably go through. You're probably very thorough, I would think. And in this case, you probably had all the documentation, of course, right? The case.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've written, this is my 14th book. So I mean, that's pretty important as well. 11 of those were true crime books. And so, I mean, I didn't cover crime for the newspaper. I did it on weekends here and there. My beat was investigative reporting, mostly into government and political doings, corruption, negligence, incompetence. And that was more, more of my area. But, I also covered prisons, and I covered the mental health system. And so I have a pretty broad background. I have really good sources. So I got the sheriff's investigative file from more than one source. And that was not released to reporters. It was not released to the public. It was also not released in any major way during the civil trial. So my book contains a lot of information that just never came out. Which just gives a lot of context, both to the investigation, what it covered and what it didn't cover.
Were you able to add any new details to your book based on the last trial? Or was the book pretty much done by then?
No, I didn't start writing the book until after the trial. So I that is my practice. I always wait until after the trial. You get some quick hit books that are published by certain publishers
Sure.
where they come out before the trial, or maybe they wait until the very last day to make sure there's a conviction so that the publisher feels safe legally. But then there's 5 pages from the trial, because the person didn't go to the trial. They just found out there was a conviction. I sat through every single day of the trial. I was the only writer in there every day because, journalism these days, I were talking about this the other day, they don't have the resources, they don't have the staffing, and they can't cover everything, and they don't. So, I was there every day, and so I was able to see what was new. And when I went through the investigative file, I could see what still had not come out. So yes, there was new information that I heard for the first time while sitting in the courtroom, and that actually helped me just as a person. What was curious? What did I want to go deeper? What did I want to know more about? And I'll give you 2 examples. Neil Nalepa, who was Rebecca's ex-husband, they showed just brief little excerpts from his deposition. And I also had access to his interview with the detectives. I learned a lot about what was brought up in court, but only kind of hinted at, just to make Rebecca look like a, impulsive, unstable, woman who slept around on her husband. I didn't feel like that was fair to her. I didn't feel like that was probably true. There was something else that came out. Her ex-boyfriend, another ex-boyfriend from while she was married, Michael Berger, there were excerpts of his deposition that were also played at the trial, talking about a kidnapping where she disappeared while she was living with him. And he called the Glendale police to report her missing. And because she started calling him and saying, they've got something over my eyes. They've taken me. I don't know where I am. And she showed up again, and then she left. And he did not know until the deposition 17 years later that she had gone back to her husband. And she never told him that. So there were things that came out at the trial that piqued my interest, and I wanted to know more about Rebecca ZAHAU. I wanted to know more about the stories she told the people in her life. And I started seeing that there were some conflicting stories, that what she told different people, her family, her boyfriend, her husband, Jonah, a lot of different stories, different versions of the same story, depending on who she was talking to.
So nothing ever came out about why or who kidnapped her.
She told Michael Berger essentially that it was she had to go back to Neil, her husband. So I don't know if she told him it was Neil, or if she just said she had to go back to Neil, and that was all she said. She was crying. He thought she was in danger. He really thought she was kidnapped, and still to this day, we talked about it. And he thinks it was Neil and maybe a couple friends, because he said he could hear them in the background, and she would be talking to them, ow, and he's like, are you talking to me? And she said, no. So it's just a weird thing to do, first of all. Did Neil force her to do that? Did she come up with this story? What really happened? It was just kind of a strange, bizarre thing. I just wanted to find out more, because I think it talks to who she was and what her state of mind was.
Well, I think they probably were, I would think probably the sheriff's department probably investigated them and found that they probably had alibis, I would guess.
Well, basically what happened is she came back a couple days later, and Michael Berger said, we're going to the police. And so she's like, I don't want to go to the police. I don't want to go. And he made her go, and they went in, and she talked to the detectives. And then he said, well, was it my turn? I want to talk to the detectives. And they said, no, it's okay. You can go home. Well, the police report says she told them that she was going back to her husband and she hadn't broken up with Michael Berger yet. And I have the police report, and that's what happened.
I don't remember hearing about that part of this.
It came out during the trial, but only briefly.
Yeah.
So I don't know that the sheriff's department would have had access to that, but it was, it came out at trial, and then I got the documents. I think it might have been part of the investigative report. I can't remember, to be honest. The sheriff's department might have known about it, but they did talk to Neil Nalepa, and he said he was at a lecture and at the gym at the time that she would have been killed if she was killed. And so they figured, okay, he's got an alibi.
A lot of different things that we have not heard about. How many people did you interview in total for the book?
Oh, I don't know. I can't. It wasn't a huge number, honestly, because I had the whole investigative file. I had what came out at trial. I sat through every day. I interviewed Michael Berger, though, a number of times, because he hadn't been interviewed by anyone. Wow. And I interviewed Jonah Shacknai 8 times, a couple hours each time. I also interviewed Adam Shacknai face-to-face, and I interviewed his girlfriend of, 20-some years by phone. So I talked to people who other people had not talked to. And so there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of new information in there, a lot of perspectives. But I also had the sheriff's detectives interviews with some of the family members, the ZAHAU family members, and, Neil Nalepa. So these are all people who had not been really interviewed by the media before. So it is new information to the public.
Well, you probably go into one of these investigations with an open mind. Mm-hmm. Probably not too many surprises, because when you go into something with an open mind, you just kind of take it as it is, and it's like a piece of a puzzle, right?
Oh, there were a lot of surprises. I mean,
right?
I've described it like a tennis match, and I've had readers tell me the same thing, that they have gone back. You know how you watch a tennis match and you're watching it go back and forth? That's pretty much what it was like for me investigating it. And I tried to recreate that for the reader. And people have told me they went in thinking one thing, and then they changed their mind several times. And then at the end, they still were unsure what to think, because there's so much new information. And so I came out of it basically saying, I can't take a position either way. I can't tell you that it's suicide, and I can't tell you that it's murder, because there's just too many unanswered questions. And some of the forensic evidence, the suicide theory just doesn't make sense. But then again, there is evidence, I think, that she did commit suicide based on her state of mind and a number of other psychological factors in these different stories that she told people. But there's a forensic evidence that doesn't make sense. Like, why wasn't she decapitated from a 9-foot fall, either partially or entirely? Why is there no DNA from anybody else but her? Back and forth. I can go back and forth and say murder, suicide. I don't know. There's just things just don't make sense both ways.
She was hogtied.
I think her family attorneys and experts believe she could have been hogtied, and then the ropes were cut, but that's a little unclear. When she was Adam Shacknai, when he said that when he found her, she was hanging with her hands tied behind her back and her ankles tied, but separately, and the rope was around her neck was separate. So, but when the police came and found her on the courtyard lawn, her her hands were still behind her back and her legs were bent. So it almost looked like she had been hogtied because the police didn't see her hanging. He cut her down before they got there. So we only have his word that he cut her down. And the lividity is not all in her feet, where you would think it would be if she were hanging for hours. And that's another thing that doesn't make sense. If he had just cut her down right then, why wasn't her lividity? And lividity means basically where the blood settles with gravity after the heart stops beating. The purple pattern of, blood settling was horizontal, not vertical.
Okay.
So not all in her feet where you would think it would have been. So that's another thing that doesn't make sense if it was suicide.
Or maybe she wasn't hanging there as long as people might think she was.
Well, he said he got up, pleasured himself, took a shower, came out, found her within, half an hour. So he said he woke up around 6:15, came out around 6:45, called 911. Just repeating what he said.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things going on with this case.
Yeah, there are a lot of things.
I mean, I've never heard some of the things you've mentioned today. These are all new things for me. I try to go into the interviews not too rehearsed because I like the surprise element,
mm-hmm.
and you're definitely bringing surprises.
Well, good, thank you.
So the family, how have they responded to the book?
I haven't heard anything, and I'm happy about that, because I think if they thought that it was, full of factual errors, or if they were upset, they would say something. I don't think they're going to like a lot of the things that are in the book, because it doesn't jibe with their story about, and their narrative about Rebecca and the type of person she was. They say she was very happy and strong, and didn't feel guilty about Max's death. And just briefly, we need to just explain, 2 days, less than 48 hours before her body was found, Jonah Shacknai's little boy, 6-year-old Max Shacknai, took a tragic fall from an interior balcony. Rebecca was the only adult in the house. Her little sister was staying with her, who had come in to visit. She's 13. They called 911, and Rebecca told Jonah that she had been giving Max CPR, so they thought he had a chance to survive. But it turned out that he really was pretty severely injured in the head from falling, and there was a chandelier found next to him, a broken glass chandelier, broken glass all over the floor, a razor scooter, a soccer ball, and a dog, a large Weimaraner, barking. So Rebecca said she didn't know how he fell, but the sheriff's department declared it an accident. And the sheriff's department later said that Rebecca killed herself because she felt guilty about Max's injuries. And so anyway, the family says, no, she was happy. She never said, she wasn't happy that he fell, but before the accident, she was a happy person. She was strong. She never would have done this. She wouldn't have hung herself naked to humiliate the family. She went to Bible college. She just wasn't this type of person. But as my investigation showed, she may have shown that side to her family, and they may truly believe that's who she was. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying there were other sides to her that maybe they just weren't familiar with. So I think I doubt they're thrilled with my book, because it contains other information about the other parts of her. So, I didn't write it to hurt them. I tried to be very sensitive to their feelings, and especially the way I wrote it. And I always do that, always keep the victim's family in mind.
I'm sure you do. What was the relationship between Rebecca and the young man, the little boy?
Oh, they loved each other. They were very close. She took care of him. She was almost like a nanny, in effect, and stepmother, nanny kind of. She quit her job as an ophthalmic technician earlier that year, it was 2011, to take care of him and Jonah. So Jonah was actually, duplicating what she had been making as a salary so she could have her own money, and she was spending time with Max. And he also had 2 teenage kids that she would also help take care of. They got the kids 50-50 custody with two different ex-moms, ex-wives rather, the kids' mothers. So they had the kids all at once half the time.
What about Max's mom? Any information on her? Because she's been somewhat, quiet. Am I correct?
Oh, well, she was pretty out there on TV and what have you for a while there, because she believes that her little boy was murdered. So, and she blamed Rebecca for quite some time. She eventually backed off that publicly anyway. She did not want to cooperate with this book, and it's her choice. But I always pull everything I can from the public domain to tell the stories of the people who don't want to cooperate with me for whatever their reasons are, privacy or grief or whatever their reasons are. I don't know, but I always try to get everybody to cooperate and tell their stories. But if they don't want to, I still try to represent their feelings, their views, their positions. And she had a deposition that was played during the trial. And I got information from other people involved in the story who I interviewed and, did my best to recreate the events. And she was initially named in this lawsuit that the ZAHAUs filed, she and her sister, Nina, but they were ultimately dismissed before it went to trial because their whereabouts were accounted for.
What was
by the sheriff's department, I should say. Yeah.
What was the relationship between Rebecca and Max's mom?
They did not get along. There was a lot of conflict there. In fact, there was enough conflict with her and with Jonah's teenagers, his children, that it was causing problems in the relationship between Rebecca and Jonah, so much so that they might have, their relationship was not doing well. And Jonah told me that if, he had hoped that they could get through that summer and have the relationship survive. But he said at that level of conflict, he figured that they probably would have had to end the relationship at the end of that summer anyway. So, and there's, that was reflected in two notes that were on Rebecca's phone, kind of like diary entries that she had, kind of letters that you might write to someone, but then not send.
Right.
So she was very upset about this. And she felt upset that Jonah wasn't sticking up for her in her mind, in terms of her dealings with the ex-wives and the teenagers. She felt that she was being disrespected. She felt that he didn't take her side enough. And, I talked to him about all that. And he said, well, she's right. I did side with my kids. They're my kids. And Dina is Dina. And there was nothing we could do about Dina. That's just who she was. If we could have just lived in a bubble, maybe we would have made it. But because they loved each other, but there were just all these, other conflicts. And, she wanted to have children. He told her he didn't want to have any more children. So there were a number of other things going on. She was not sleeping. She was depressed. She was clearly angry too about some of these things. And these things weren't dated, but they seem to be pretty recent.
They say when you marry somebody, you marry their family.
Right.
Package deal.
Yeah.
So I get it.
Yeah.
What was the relationship between the brother, what was the brother-in-law's name again?
Adam.
And Rebecca.
According to Adam, they were fine. They got along fine. They weren't close, but no problems previously. They asked him he was on the stand, were you attracted to Rebecca? And he's like, well, she was my brother's girlfriend. So
that doesn't really answer the question.
Yeah, those were the kind of answers he gives. I would ask him questions and I'd get a complete non sequitur. Like, okay, so when you said I got a girl hung herself in the guest house, did you mean guest room? I was trying to give him an out to explain a very bizarre statement that he started the 911 call with, because he was the one in the guest house and he kept saying that she was in the main house. So I was like asking him to explain that. And he goes, it was a 911 call. That was his answer to me. So
does he seem to be all there? Does he seem
stable? My partner's son is autistic. And I've gotten to learn a lot about people who are on the spectrum, and you don't have to be full-blown autistic, but there are things about Adam's behavior. He was ranting to the news media. He would be on a radio show, he would do a press conference, and he would just say the most unfiltered things and cussing, F-bombs and
Really?
yeah, while he was being interviewed by TV reporters. So I mean, they even ran on the media and they would bleep it or whatever because he was just saying these things. So I think he has some filter issues, you know. So I mean, he's, according to Jonah, he's just this case, and he feels he's been wrongly accused and wrongly, found to be responsible, and that his lawyer was saying, look, he's been labeled as a killer and a sexual deviant, and so he wanted to clear his name. He wanted to, file an appeal, but his insurance company, who was paying for his legal representation, settled with the ZAHAUs after the civil verdict, without his approval. He did not want that. He wanted a chance to clear his name.
So why do you think they found him guilty in that trial?
Well, okay, so there's a lot going on here. I mean, just from a legal standpoint, the defense, I think, wanted to make it a higher bar for the jury to have to meet by not separating, number one, is it murder? Number two, was it Adam Shacknai who killed her? So if they think it's a murder, they didn't really have a choice. Adam's the defendant. Adam did it. So if they had put those into two separate questions, which is what Keith Greer, the ZAHAU's attorney, actually wanted them to do, they could have said it was murder and not Adam Shacknai, but they didn't get that choice. So that's number one. The vote was 9-3, so it was not unanimous. But, I think a lot of people really think she was murdered. And, the ZAHAU's attorney and experts presented a scenario that the jury bought. The sheriff's department thinks that it's very emotional, and, that it, there were things that didn't make sense and wasn't based on science. And that's why they didn't initially want to even review the case. But Sheriff Gore ended up agreeing to do that once his opponent in the race said, well, I'm going to reopen this case immediately if I get elected. So Sheriff Gore said, okay, we'll review it. But they didn't re-interview anybody. They didn't interview anyone new. They didn't do a number of things that a number of outside experts believe they should have to do a fair and thorough re-examination of their own investigation, which is part of the issue.
So again, with that being said, why was the brother selected as the person that possibly could have done that? Because
he was the only one there. He's the only other known person who was on the property. So according to him, they all went out to dinner. He and Jonah and Rebecca went to dinner. Rebecca dropped off Jonah back at the hospital and took Adam back to the mansion. They said goodbye and goodnight. Adam went into the guest house. Rebecca went into the main house, and then he called 911 the next morning and said he found her hanging. So by his own admission, he's the only one there, and there wasn't anybody else, and they didn't find any DNA, obviously, from anybody else. So that was it. And so the initial lawsuit said it was Nina, Dina, and Adam in a conspiracy. They did it together, because, it's not easy for a woman to pick up a 100-pound person and get them over the balcony. So they must have figured it must have been Adam. And so, plus the other thing is there were knots. There was an elaborate set of knots around her wrists and ankles, slip knots, but tied in a pretty elaborate way, that the ZAHAU's experts said were maritime knots, and Adam is a tugboat captain.
So the knots might have clinched that situation.
I think the knots, well, that was the argument, that they were maritime knots. His attorney said, oh no, they were so simple that a bird or a gorilla could have tied those knots. So there was a debate even about what type of knots they were.
Were there photos of the knots anywhere?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What
And
was your
so
what was your take on
I
looking at
thought they
the
were very elaborate. When the ZAHAU's experts did a demonstration, they brought in a mannequin,
uh-huh.
and they were only allowed to expose the portion of the body that they were doing the demonstration on, so because they thought it would be so prejudicial to have a naked mannequin, which they ultimately did in the closing arguments, which was very dramatic, very disturbing. But during the demonstration, um, the ZAHAU's expert did a very elaborate demonstration of how he thought the knots had been tied based on looking at the photos of her on the grass. And then also they preserved the knots on 2 cardboard rings. And so he was studied those, and that's what he came up with.
It's a
Plus
very
there was sorry, one more thing. There
it's
was
a
another thing that the ZAHAU's also argued, um, which some people say is a stretch. Some people, I guess, just accepted it as part of the whole thing. But there was a knife, a steak knife, found on the floor of the bedroom where the rope was anchored to the bed. And according to the ZAHAU's expert, they found red stains on the bottom 2 rivets of the handle, the wooden handle, and they believe that was inserted into her genital area, and that so she was sexually assaulted, because she had no bleeding wound anywhere, but she was on her period. So that was another thing that they mentioned. And so that played into the whole theory about, well, he's a sexual deviant, and he tried to have sex with her and she said no. There was a confrontation and struggle, and then he hit her over the head 4 times, manually strangled her, and then put her over the railing. That was the ZAHAU's scenario for how she died.
Was there any type of trauma to when they did the autopsy to her, I guess it was the vaginal region?
Yeah, but no, because it's like a steak knife handle, which is the size of a tampon. It wasn't, it's not the sharp part. It was the
Right,
handle part.
but it was
Not
probably
big enough,
yeah, I
not big
would think
enough, not long
to
enough.
show anything.
No.
And then, of course, she had, I guess, trauma to her head. Some believe that it could
Yeah,
have
she
been
had these 4 bruises that the pathologist that the ZAHAU's had do a second autopsy, Cyril Wecht. He said that that was due to some blunt instrument. And the sheriff's department, the medical examiner's office, said she hit her head when she was swinging down underneath.
so in the autopsy, did based on the way she was hanging, is there a possibility that, she did hit her head the way she was
I'm
hanging?
not an expert, so I can't comment. I'm just letting you know what the other experts said.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause I would think there's probably a way that I would think that they would be able to tell if it was, something
Yeah,
that hit her over the top of the
yeah,
head, or compared to hitting
right,
sideways
right.
against a building.
Yeah. And so the Cyril Wecht said that basically that didn't make sense to him, that she wouldn't have hit her head that way, like that, etc. There are also 2 ligature marks on her neck, not
Uh-huh.
just 1, but 2,
2.
which is also weird. And she did not have serious injuries to her neck, which is like a Jeffrey Epstein thing. There are people who believe he was murdered also. Similar types of injuries in both cases. So there are certain injuries that go with manual strangulation. There are certain injuries that go with hanging. And there are experts in both of these cases who believe that they both were murdered and not hung.
Well, I guess like anything, there's probably people that have specialties,
Mhm.
that know how to do certain things.
Based on the number of cases, based on cases they've seen, based on statistics of cases, where, okay, so for example, I guess I'm going to get the name wrong now because I've forgotten. But when most hangings are like 1 to 2 feet, so you're not going to have serious injuries in here. But 9 feet, 100 pounds, boom, they said she should have been partially or entirely decapitated by
Really?
that. Yeah, and she wasn't. She didn't have anything broken in here, just some fractured cartilages. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense. So,
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't
now
make sense.
here's the thing. You have experienced something similar, like you mentioned earlier, with your husband at one time.
He hung himself over a door. I don't know about the nature of the injuries in his neck. Honestly, it was in Mexico. Somebody else went down there and had him cremated for me and brought him back in a box of ashes, and that's what I know.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
So why, if you were hanging 9 feet, I'm just trying to get a handle on this. Why wasn't there more damage? What would the theory be? What was the theory behind that? Because at 9 feet, you're right, there should probably be more damage, I would think, and there really wasn't.
I don't know. I honestly, to be fair, I don't know what the answer was to that from the medical examiner's office, or if he responded to that.
There would have, I mean, it seems kind of like a blank. I mean, there should be an answer, I would think, right?
There may be, honestly, I'd have to reread the autopsy report, but they said she somehow hopped from outside the
Bedroom.
French doors. There's a balcony, a short balcony there, that she supposedly hopped toward the railing and then like bent over and propelled herself somehow over the railing, which also doesn't make sense because there's no like footprints. There's like a toe or two near the railing. She's 100 pounds. How is she going to propel herself hopping with her arms to back and her feet tied? It's physically pretty tricky. And why would she tie herself up like that? That is the main thing for me. Why like that? Or why would someone kill her like that? There has to be more that we just don't know.
Was there a gag in the mouth?
Yeah, there was a t-shirt that was wrapped around her 3 times in her mouth, like a gag. And it was, over the hanging rope and over her hair, which for a woman is other women say, well, she would have pulled that out. Even if she was going to kill herself, that's a natural reflex. You would pull your hair out of the thing.
Was that shirt somehow under by the rope? Was the rope over that area of the shirt?
No, the shirt was on top of the rope, on top of her hair.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. You've opened my mind again. Is there anything you'd want to add to anybody out there that maybe is not familiar with the case, that maybe is hearing this for the first time, which I'd be surprised if they did, of course, but we have a worldwide audience. What did you want them to get from your book?
I just wanted to clear up a lot of the misinformation and speculation. Here's the facts of what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what outside experts say was done wrong or not done at all in the sheriff's investigation. If it were reopened by an independent agency, could some of these questions be answered? And maybe it was a suicide. Maybe that could just be fully resolved if they did some more in-depth examination or re-interviewed people, or maybe somebody will step forward that has information that was too scared to before. I mean, I've had people emailing me with information since the book came out who were too scared to come out before. So I'm not law enforcement. I went to law enforcement. I laid out some of the information I had gathered, and I said, look, I am scared. If there really is a killer out there, I'm scared. You guys have subpoena power. Why don't you follow up some of these leads? I've never done that before. The media and the journalists and authors, we don't usually share information with law enforcement because we're supposed to be independent watchdogs. That's not how our democracy works. That's why reporters, won't share their interview notes or their sources, even when they're forced to go to court, and they'll sit in jail to do that, to protect people. In this case, I literally said, here, look, can you investigate some of these leads that I have? Maybe they're not true. I don't know, but I don't feel safe and I don't have subpoena power. Ask this person this question. And, and I basically was told, well, the criminal case is closed. We don't have subpoena power. I said, well, how about reopening it? Nope. So that was kind of interesting, I thought.
So there's people like we were talking about earlier that are specialists in what they do. And I myself investigate things, and I use specialties, people that have specialties, to find out things. So based on what we're talking about, let's say it was a suicide. Did you talk to anybody that maybe is familiar with these types of situations that involve suicide and hanging?
It's there's one journal article I could find anywhere called Naked Suicide, which
Mhm.
basically said there's almost nothing written about naked suicide because we don't know much about it, or it's, just doesn't happen. But this combination, the naked, the gagged, the bound, and the outside part and the female part, that's what makes this so unique. It,
It almost sounds like somebody was trying to humiliate her.
well, that's what some of the outside experts have said, that if she did this to herself, she was pretty angry, right? And so that is one of the theories, that she did this to herself because she was angry and she was trying to send a message. Or she staged it to look like a homicide to protect her family and Jonah. And you know what? You can't try to rationalize this, because people who commit suicide are not in a rational state of mind.
Mhm.
I've been writing about suicide for, much of my career. I was nominated for a Pulitzer at the Union Tribune for a guy out in East County who I was just actually emailing his family today. He was 19 years old. He just graduated from high school. He was about to go into the military, and he grabbed some kind of, flammable liquid. I can't remember if it was paint thinner or turpentine or something like that, from the garage. And he went to the Walmart in, I think it was Lakeside, can't remember, El Cajon, somewhere out there, and basically poured it over himself, lit himself on fire, and nobody saw that coming. Nobody saw that coming, but he was clearly not in the right state of mind. He was
Sure.
depressed. He didn't have hope, or I don't know what was going on, but his family said, he wouldn't have done that if he had known how much it was going to hurt everyone he left behind. And he wouldn't have done it to himself, because that's got to be the most incredibly painful way to do that to
Sure.
yourself. He had no
Well,
idea how much that was going to hurt physically. It
right.
took him a while to die, and his mother couldn't even hug him goodbye, because when you have burns like that all over your body, no one can touch you because you're in so much pain.
I can't even
So
imagine.
sad, so sad.
Well, and going back to her situation is sad, what you just said.
Yeah,
The case
it's all
is,
sad.
well, that situation is pouring fuel of some kind that's flammable on your body and then lighting a match. It's pretty clear that that person committed that act on themselves. Now, going
Right.
back to Rebecca, just
Mhm,
the way she was gagged, bound, the
mhm.
way just there's a lot of inconsistencies compared to that situation you just said, and I think
Right,
that's why there's so many
right.
there's so many things that are not answered.
And her family has pointed out, and this is true, there's nothing that showed she had been searching for how to tie myself up or anything like that. I've written books about cases where the killer gets caught that way.
Mhm.
How to make a murder look like an accident. Literally, there was a guy I wrote, Steve DeMacher, had that on his browser history. Thought he had software to clear the
Right.
browser
Uh-huh.
history and didn't do it properly. And the sheriff's department found these searches on his computer. And he says, "Oh, I was writing a murder mystery. I was doing research." But she didn't have that. So that's what I'm saying. If she did that, she must have had some knowledge about bondage or tying yourself up like that, but it's not on her computer. And Jonas said he never didn't know anything about that. She never did that with him.
Did
But
Jonah
Adam
ever
Shacknai is convinced it's shibari,
That's a
which
Japanese
is
knot?
Japanese self-tying, artistic / erotic kind of practice.
I wouldn't even know. I'd have to dig into this.
Well, he said he did some research online, and then there were videos of self-tying. So
Not by her, though.
no, not by her. But that's what he was saying. He did some research, and that's what, because he says, I didn't know how to tie those knots. I didn't tie those knots. Those are not, I thought that was one thing my lawyers did wrong, was that You know, they tried to say that the knots were really simple. I don't know how to tie those knots. That's what he said.
Okay.
So
Well, you know, you've enlightened all of us today for people that want to get the book, and I highly recommend it.
thank you.
I'm going to be reading it as I fly out tonight. Of course, it's called Death on Ocean Boulevard Inside the Coronado Mansion Case.
And there's more that I didn't mention because I didn't want to ruin it for you or for other readers who haven't read it
I
yet.
didn't
But
want to
there's
ruin anything because I want them to
right.
get the book and read it.
There's more surprises in there even than we've talked about. So
Well, I appreciate what you do, and I'm glad we finally got a chance to see each other from a distance. Thank you for what you do, and for doing this story, because I think it needed to be done
thank you. I appreciate that.
in a proper way, the way that you've done it, which is nonpartisan, investigating with an open mind, and no opinions on really other than what you found.
Yep. I still feel that way. I still feel that way. I don't know. I hope we find out. I hope we still have a chance to do that.
There's another trial coming up.
Not sure about that. There is a pending lawsuit. Yes, the ZAHAUs have filed a lawsuit against the sheriff's department. It's a public records lawsuit. They're trying to force them to release more records about the investigation that they're hoping are going to shed light on the suicide ruling, that maybe it wasn't, maybe there is other stuff that they didn't release that might point not to suicide. So we'll see what happens.
Okay.
That's still pending.
We will find out what happens.
Yeah.
Caitlyn Rother, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you got some information today about this book. I highly recommend, and I look forward to reading and digging into it. And let's find out the truth as much as we can. I mean,
I hope so.
Let's put this thing to rest and see if maybe these clues and things that Caitlyn has put together, we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Attorney King, of course. And thank you, Saquon. And thank you, Marina Teal. And thank you, what was the other? Nikki Rottens. How can I forget? You know, Freud used to say the mind is the second thing to go. Never mind. Everybody take care. Of course, an Indian motorcycle. Thank you so much, everybody. God bless and take care.